Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Namo sadanto sucedoye aladi samya sambuddhoje. Namo sadanto sucedoye aladi samya sambuddhoje. Together. 无上甚深微妙法，百千万劫难遭遇。我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。The unsurpassed, deep, profound, subtle, wonderful Dharma, in 100,000 million eons is difficult to encounter. Now that I've come to receive and hold it within my sight and hearing, I vow to fathom the thus come one's true and actual meaning. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Venerable Master, Dharma Masters, and all good and wise friends in the Dharma. Tonight is May 16th. We're here in Berkeley Buddhist Monastery, and we're going to start the Avatamsaka Sutra lecture. And what we usually start with is an invocation of the name of the sutra, as well as you could say the assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas associated with the sutra. And so you'll see it on the front cover of your text. You can see it. And so what we do is we'll start reciting it 7 times in the Chinese. It's on the bottom. But on the English it goes, Homage to the Buddha's Flower Garland Sutra of Great Expanded Teachings, and the Ocean-Wide Flower Garland Assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That's the English, but we'll do it in the Chinese. Okay, so if everyone can put their palms together, and if we put our hearts together as well, and be really sincere in our requests, the idea is that that spiritual energy will come join us in the hall. Okay. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Zai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Zai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Zai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Zai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Zai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Zai. Namo Da Fang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Zai. So good evening, everyone. Jing Hesher and myself, Jing Chuan, will be lecturing tonight on the Avatamsaka Sutra. We're right now on the 6th round of the 10th rounds chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra. I think the Sanskrit is the Dasha Bhumi. Dasha is 10, Bhumi is ground. So if you're got the sutra text, we're on, let me open the book. We're on the very last ground on page 39. Not far, their last page, 38, 39. Not quite on the last ground yet. 38, 39. And so we're at the very end of this part of the sutra. We've been going over the six grounds for quite a long time. And so we're about to just finish this section. And so what we were thinking of doing tonight is because it's also a little bit ends the semester here for this period of time. The winter semester is about to end, and the summer is about to roll in. All our classes in the monastery are ending. And Reverend Heng Shi will be back next week to continue the lecture. And so we thought to make tonight a kind of a concluding lecture, kind of gathering in the Avatamsaka in the sense of giving a little bit of an overview. So we'll get a chance to read just the whole thing. We get to feel like we finished this part of the sutra, and then do a little bit of a kind of a overview of the Avatamsaka. So, yeah, of the 10 grounds, or particularly the 6 paramitas. So what just to give some people a context, if people are not familiar with the Avatamsaka Sutra, or just even this kind of teaching, or where we are in the Dharma. I don't know if people are familiar at all with the first teaching of the Buddha, called the teaching, you say the starting of the turning of the Dharma wheel, where the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the source of suffering coming from craving, and then the ending of suffering, and then the way out of suffering being the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. And so the Buddha basically gave that teaching to the first five monks. He had his fellow friends who were cultivating with him in the past. And so after he woke up under the Bodhi tree, he went to teach these 5 monks, or these 5 cultivators, and he taught them that teaching. And that teaching of the Four Noble Truths is actually given, they say, in 3 turnings. I don't know if people know the 3 turnings. They say in the 3 turnings, in the 12 aspects for the 4. So the 4 Noble Truths times 3 makes 12. And so the Buddha basically said, first, there is suffering. There is an origin of suffering. There's a cessation of suffering. And there's a way out of suffering. And so he first said, basically, this is how it is. I know it for myself. So he kind of declared that. He kind of said, this is how it is. And then that's not the end point in Buddhism. It's not the Buddha says, okay, this is how it is, and end of sutra. He said, actually, the next step is you should know it for yourself. And so for ourselves, it'd be, I should understand suffering. I should understand the source of suffering. I should understand how it comes to an end and to cultivate that path. And so that's the second turning. The second is a kind of exhortation. A kind of, you can even use it in our own minds. A kind of I'm going to put this into practice and try it out. So it's the second turning the Buddha did. And the third one is, he says, basically, you have known, or for us would be, I have understood suffering. I have understood the source of suffering. I have understood the ending of suffering, and I have understood the way out of, the Noble Eightfold Path, the way out of suffering. And that's not an understanding which is intellectual, actually. That's an understanding of kind of clear insight, of seeing very, very clearly. And so the Buddha put forward that model for his teachings. Basically, he's seen it for himself. He encourages others to try it out, and he says that you will see it for yourself as well. So in the end, the Dharma is about seeing for ourselves. We're going to put into practice and try it out for ourselves. So that's within that tradition. In the very early on was the 3 turnings. Then later, there's another model of another 3 turnings. And this is where we can start seeing the Avatamsaka. And so the idea was the Buddha, when he began teaching the Dharma, he saw that as living beings, quote unquote us, have a lot of confusion. We don't see things very clearly. And for him to explain the Dharma, which is beyond words and concepts, is very, very difficult. pretty much it's hard for us to really grasp. It's actually impossible for us to really grasp with our conscious minds. We have to let go of that to be able to see it. So for him to explain it to our conscious mind is just to point us out, to get us out of our kind of discriminating mind. And so he taught the first turning would just be the first turning of the Four Noble Truths and those teachings that are given in the early on times, where he's basically teaching those ideas of not self, of letting go of ourself. We often say it's the path to become an arhat, to wake up, to get out of this kind of confusion of this, we call it samsara, this world of confusion, to get out. So that's the first turning, he said, is those early teachings. And then the second turning is, we sometimes call it the prajna period, the prajna paramita teachings. Prajna means wisdom, or literally prajna means, pra is kind of before, jna is like knowledge, before knowing. So it's the kind of a deeper knowing. It's before your conscious mind kind of starts going at something. And so it's a deep penetrating wisdom that particularly looks at emptiness and sees it very clearly. And in that teaching, the Buddha not only empties out the self, he actually empties out the teachings as well. So for instance, if people are familiar with the Heart Sutra, we recite in the monastery twice a day, it goes, there is no truth, there is no noble truth of suffering, there is no noble truth of the source of suffering, there's no noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and there's no noble truth of the way out of suffering. Not to say that there's no teaching, he's just trying to have you let go of that teaching as well, to see through it as well, because that's just another raft to get us to somewhere else. And so in that period, the Buddha introduces this spirit of emptying out the dharmas and the teachings as well. In addition, this kind of bodhisattva heart of addressing the suffering of living beings. So we see that here, that although the bodhisattva, if you've been in the sutra lectures, the bodhisattva sees the emptiness of all dharmas, but he sees living beings suffering. He sees living beings being confused by all the various conditions of the world, and because of that, has a heart of great compassion. It says, I'm gonna help them, and I'm gonna. Although there's no living beings, he's emptied that, he's not attached. He says, but I'm gonna go and help them. I'm gonna rescue them and help them. So there's this kind of interplay of this kind of stillness of emptiness and this engagement of great compassion that's coming out at that time. And then finally, in the third turning, we get this kind of teaching of the Buddha saying we all have this potential to become Buddhas, and this sense of we have this awakening potential that is particularly manifested in the Avatamsaka Sutra. The Avatamsaka Sutra is that, you could say, a description of what it's like to have the vision of the Buddha, so that our conscious minds can understand, can get a little glimpse of what that might be. In fact, this sutra was spoken for the great bodhisattvas. How it's said is that when the Buddha was upon awakening, taught the Avatamsaka Sutra, but it was taught that ordinary living beings, because we didn't have, they say, although we have eyes, we didn't see it. Although we have ears, we didn't hear it, because we wouldn't have the connection to be able to touch it. But later on, it was brought forward, and the teachings came out for us to study. And it's, you could say, it's something that we can look into and see how it can connect to our lives. The idea is how to make the sutra really make sense to us, to really come to life in our lives. And that's, so Master Hua, who gave the kind of is the founder of the monastery here, really emphasized that although this sutra was spoken for the great bodhisattvas, don't think this sutra is the sutra and I am me and we're completely separate. I'm not a great bodhisattva, so it's not for me. He says, make the sutra and you one. Take the principles of the sutras and make it part of our lives. And from there, the sutra gains new life. And so although it's spoken for great bodhisattvas, it's also spoken to us. We can see these principles in our lives. And so this is, you could say, the awakened vision of the Buddha. And so this pure part of the sutra is a part where the Buddha is actually explaining in sequence how to cultivate the bodhisattva path. And we're actually on a fairly high stage. This is considered the 10 grounds chapter, and we're on the 6th ground, which is basically, if people are familiar with the paramitas, which we'll go over tonight, the 6th paramita is the paramita of prajna, that is the wisdom. And so this bodhisattva is basically looking and investigating prajna, wisdom. So when we read this passage here, you'll get a flavor of that spirit of emptiness, the spirit of a kind of a deep, penetrating insight into the nature of reality. So, I don't know if you would like to say a few words or want to read the sutra text. Okay, so if you would please turn to page 38, we'll read the... Yeah, please.
So I can just add to what Jin Chuan Shi was saying about the second period of Prajna Paramita, the second Prajna Paramita, where the teachings itself are seen as empty, because the Buddha describes all his teachings as spoken to the condition of living beings. That means all his teachings are not absolute, are not seen as absolute truths in themselves, but to cure, they serve as a function. They're what's called upaya in Sanskrit, as in they are expedient means. They are taught to serve a function so that living beings can leave the defilements of the discursive mind behind. So because of that, in Prajna Paramita, say an arhat who has achieved, who has realized Prajna Paramita at the 4th stage of arhatship, or a bodhisattva at the first ground, they see through that, and they understand that the teachings are only spoken to the conditions of living beings.
Yeah. So okay. So if you can open to top of page 38, let's read the top of the sutra text. Let's see. We have quite a bit, but I guess I'll read. I'll start off reading the Chinese, and then you can repeat, and then when we read the English, we'll read it together. Okay. 大师修行解脱门，大师修行解脱门，转益大悲求佛法，知诸有为和合作，自要决定勤行道。空三昧门至百千，无相无愿亦复然。般若顺忍解真上，解脱智慧得成难。复以身心多供佛，于佛教中修习道，修习道，得佛法藏真善根，如镜琉璃所磨影，镜琉璃所磨影，如月清凉皮重物，似风来出无能坏。此地菩萨超魔道，一洗群生烦恼热， 此地多作善化王。化导众生，身除我慢。化导众生，出我慢。所作皆求一切智。一切智。习以草圣生闻道。Read the English. Want to finish? Okay, we'll finish the Chinese. Flip over next page. 此地菩萨清精进。或诸三昧百千亿。一见若干无量佛。譬如身下空中日。深深微妙难见之。声闻度觉无能了。如是菩萨第六地。我为佛子以宣说。Okay, so if we read the English together. As the great knight cultivates the door to liberation, he augments great compassion and seeks the Buddha Dharma. He knows that all conditioned is made from combination. Fixed in will and inclination, he diligently cultivates the way. He obtains samadhi doors of emptiness numbering hundreds of thousands of kotis, and of marklessness and wishlessness as many he obtains. Prajna and according patience both keep on increasing. Liberation and wisdom both become complete. He further, with deep mind, makes many offerings to Buddhas, and within the Buddha's teachings he cultivates the way, obtains the treasury of the Buddha Dharma, and increases his good roots, the way that gold shines when polished with Vaidurya. Just as the moon's pure coolness refreshes sentient beings, and the four winds come and touch it, but cannot bring it harm, this bodhisattva thus transcends all demonic paths, and also quells the fire of all sentient beings' afflictions. Upon this ground, most become kings of the good transformations, and teach sentient beings to expel their pride. Every single thing they do is seeking all wisdom, and they completely transcend the path of sound hearers. So I will continue. The bodhisattva on this ground is diligent. Yeah, this part you guys don't have the sutra text because it didn't quite get printed. So I'll just read the English, and people can listen along. The bodhisattva on this ground is diligent with vigor. And acquires samadhis numbering hundreds of thousands of kotis. Okay. He also sees that many limitless Buddhas. Just like the sun in space on a midsummer's day. For Buddhist disciples, I have now proclaimed. What the sixth one of the Bodhisattva grounds is like. It is deep, subtle, wonderful, hard to see and know. The solitary enlightened and sound hearers cannot comprehend it. The solitary enlightened and sound hearers cannot comprehend it. Okay, congratulations, we finished the 6th ground. Okay, so for people who are here for the first time, this is actually a recap of what has happened before. So the sutra has 2 parts. One part is the prose section, and one part is the verses section. So this is the verse section, which basically repeats the prose section, but in verse. And the verses are very useful because it helps us aid our memory. It helps us remember the sutra text. And so what we were thinking of doing tonight, rather than going over just the text in great detail, or just to go over the text in great detail, rather to maybe just give it a bigger scope of what the Avatamsaka is about, because this will be the last one for this period of time, and Reverend Hong Sure will be coming back and starting the sutra in another, I think he'll be going over the 6th ground from the place he left off, so that there'll be a continuity. So we're thinking today would be a really good opportunity to give a little bit of a recap, and if people have questions about all that we've learned for this period of time, for this last probably 5 months, tonight would be a very good opportunity to open it up for people to ask and think about. But we're thinking this would be a really good time to basically gather in and get a good overview sense. So, okay, Jerry, we were wondering numbers of people online, just to see. 11 people. Okay, very nice. Welcome. It's good to have a lot of people coming from virtual space into the Buddha Hall here. Okay. Yeah.
So since Reverend Hung Sho will be coming back next week, actually, just technically next week, and he will be continuing from where he left off before he went to Australia. So as Jing of Chuan Shi said, that gives us the freedom to revisit the sutra, particularly the 10 grounds chapter, and from just to give a quick summary of the 1st ground right up to the 6th ground. And there are some metaphors that is used to describe the bodhisattva as he progresses from the 1st ground up to the 10. For example, gold is a metaphor used as the bodhisattva progresses. So as we introduce the 10 grounds from the 1st to the 6th, and in terms of metaphor right up to the 10, we thought of then moving towards the 6 paramitas, because the paramitas correspond, each paramita correspond to a speciality that the bodhisattva from the 1st or 6th ground practices. So from the 1st ground, it's called the ground of happiness. And I'm not sure if I'm going to ask any questions. That doesn't seem to be too many people here today. But if anyone knows, please raise your hand and volunteer an answer. And the bodhisattva on the 1st ground, which is called the ground of happiness, practices the paramita of giving. And in this ground, the metaphor that is used for the bodhisattva, because before he enters the 1st ground, the bodhisattva is just a normal human being, just like us, just like all of you here, just like all of you online, just like Jin Chuan Shi and myself. He's just a normal human being. But because he has the right mindset, he has made the right vows, and he has opened his heart so big in being able to accommodate all living beings, and he has the right practices, the right approach, he's able to become a 1st stage bodhisattva. So the metaphor used for someone, for 1st stage bodhisattva, is the smelting and softening of gold. Meaning you take, what do you call, how do you find gold in its raw form? Is it gold ore? Is it ore, O-R-E? And you smelt it. And you extract the gold away from from its raw form. So that's the bodhisattva on the 1st stage, the smelting of gold, the refining. And then on the 2nd ground, which is called the ground of living filth, or the ground of stainlessness, which means in terms of mental defilements, the bodhisattva specializes in precepts. And in this ground, the metaphor of refining gold and increasing its purity is being used. So previously, you extract the gold out, there's probably still some impurities. It's how would you say, 18 karat gold perhaps. And now he's being refined, the dross has been removed, and he's getting more into 24 karat gold territory, more pure gold, the kind that you pay a lot for. And then on the third ground, which is called the ground of emitting light, the Bodhisattva specializes in the paramita of patience. Paramita of patience is also described as the mind not moving, and we'll go into detail into the paramitas once we finish these metaphors. And the Bodhisattva at this stage is considered as pure gold. It's already been refined. It can't be refined anymore, and it's absolutely pure. 99. How do you define 24 karat? 99 point. Is it 999? I remember as a child, my mom would have this small gold wafers, like really small, like maybe an inch high and half an inch long. I think birthdays, some people would Chinese. I think it's seen as good luck. You give people gold, and I will look at it and, oh, that's gold. Okay, what does it do? Nothing much. Okay, gold, 24 karat. And then on the fourth ground, which is a ground of blazing wisdom, and the Bodhisattva here specializes in the paramita of vigor, which means he is never lazy in his approach to his practice. And here, the metaphor used is the best real gold. That's the literal translation in the sutras. It says the best real gold, but it's made into jewelry. So it's no longer like that gold wafer that I saw, but it's been fashioned into something that you can use to adorn yourself. A ring, like the Lord of the Rings, an earring. I don't know why that just came to me, Lord of the Rings. It's being fashioned into jewelry, something that is just, you add value to it. My mom is from my mom's hometown is Penang in northern Malaysia, and I remember walking the streets before and seeing goldsmiths working on gold, and they do custom designs. You can go to them and say, "This is what I want on my ring," and I think I don't think you can find any more goldsmiths anymore, or there might be. They're very rare right now. So they'll be working it. You can hear ting, ting, ting as they are shaping the gold into jewelry. Then on the fifth ground, which is called the ground of invincibility. Would anyone like to guess what happens to the gold? What form the gold takes right now? Okay. It's pure gold polished with clamshell. Clamshell meaning, I think the process of polishing gold is, at least in ancient times, when you couldn't walk to Home Depot and get jewelry polishing solutions or kits or something. You take a shell, any shell, and you rub it down into very fine powder. And then you take this powder and you rub it on the gold. And that's how you give gold that luster, that sheen. So first you have gold in pure form, then you smelt the gold, and then you further refine the gold to get 24 karat pure gold. You make it into jewelry, and then you find that, okay, I can improve this, and then you polish it, and it shines. It has a brilliance to it. Now the sixth ground, which we have just finished today, or we are finishing, called the ground of manifestation. The metaphor used is gold polished by lapis lazuli. So lapis lazuli is a mineral that if you grind down, it forms a finer powder compared to the shell. And so the finer the powder, the better the sheen that you get. Does anyone here do car detailing? So I do car detailing for Ramahang Shua's car, for the monastery's vehicles. And some of the cars have never been washed. Or it appears like it's never been washed for 5, 8, 10 years. I'm not kidding. That's how it looks like. So we start off with, if I would be particular, there's something called a clay bar that you use to remove surface impurities, but I just use, they call it a polishing compound. It's a rubbing compound, they call it. And if you take the rubbing compound and you feel it between your fingers, it's almost like very fine sand particles. And you take it and you rub, and that takes away all that impurities that the paint has picked up, but it leaves the paint surface dull. Then after that, you take a polishing compound, which is even finer. In fact, it's so fine that the new ones that you can buy in the market, you don't feel any particles. It feels just like cream. But they're so minute that when they rub against the paint and you wipe it off, it leaves a mirror-like finish. So the first one you could say would be like the clamshell. And then the second one would be lapis lazuli, a mineral that when you grind down is so fine that the luster is, I don't know, maybe like an Apple Watch now, new Apple Watch, gold Apple Watch that is I think $10,000, that kind of luster. Yep. And then on the seventh ground, which is ground of traveling far, and that one, when Ramosho comes back after he finishes from where he left off, he will come to the seventh ground. It's gold jewelry, how do I say it? Gold jewelry, clumsy mouth, inlaid with gems, like maybe a wedding ring. You have gold and you have a diamond, so it complements the gold. So it's no longer just a plain ring or just pure gold. It's gold enhanced with different colored gems. On the eighth ground, called the ground of not moving, it's gold jewelry, jewelry inlaid with gems fashioned into a strand or a necklace. How about that? It's not just something small, it becomes something more elaborate. On the ninth ground, called the ground of wholesome wisdom, it says that it is gold so pure. That means it's so refined, the markings, the workings, and the gems are so valuable. It says, it's fit as a crown for a wheel-turning sage, and it's more radiant than all the pearl necklaces of lesser kings. So I can imagine a hall where the king is there, and you have all the lords. And I grew up influenced by a lot of British stories about knights and dragons, and so I have this picture of King Arthur sitting there, and he has this golden crown with all the gems, and it outshines everyone else's, all the lords' jewelry that they have, and ladies. And finally, on the 10th ground, called the ground of Dharma cloud, it is gold inlaid with maniples, and it's worn only by the Mahashvara heaven king, which is one of the highest heavens, the highest form heavens in Buddhist cosmology. And maniples are not conventional poles. Maniples are kind of like a magical pearl. It's sometimes called a wish-fulfilling pearl, as in what you want, that pearl can grant your wishes. It's like a genie, only better. Because in the stories that I've seen, genies can sometimes play with you or talk back to you or give you things that you quite never, they tell you should think through your wish before you ask for a wish. And they teach you lessons through your wish. But a pearl, wish-fulfilling pearl, never runs out of wishes. Anything you want, you get it. So that's the metaphor that's used for a bodhisattva as he progresses from the first ground right up to the 10 grounds.
Just to point out, so that whole sequence of metaphors is something we just saw in their sutra text. The third verse says, the way that gold shines when polished with Vaidurya. And so I think what Jing Husher just went through is this very kind of you could say, not say graphic, it's very kind of a clear analogy for this process of purification. And that's supposed to be a metaphor for spiritual practice. This is a process of when we're practicing the Dharma, we're starting out and we're bit by bit purifying our nature. So we're extracting the wholesome, the good elements. Then we're purifying that, purifying, and it starts radiating. And it's a natural radiation. It's not. We have the idea of this kind of jewelry. And I was always struck reading, these Buddhist texts and it had all these kind of gold and jewels and these elements. I thought when in the monastery it's kind of, we don't have all these things. We have our, 3 robes and a bowl, and we don't get gold necklaces and
Just
a
because
crown.
you're not a bodhisattva.
Yeah, and then a
Or maybe you
bodhisattva.
are.
Yeah, so I don't have any special jewelry, but so the sense of it is that these are metaphors for our spiritual growth. In an awakened vision, I think they describe all these kind of interesting elements of this kind of everything being gold and jewelry, shining and kind of vibrant is this kind of imagery. But I think for me, what really helps me approach is to see them as a kind of a purification of our minds and our hearts. And then we just become naturally radiant. Not to say actually, possibly when we actually awaken to a deeper vision of how things are, that all of reality now becomes radiant as well. There's kind of like a jewel-like radiance to it as well. But it's not a radiance that's tinged with greed. It's not like we're going to have to go after gold and really seek after it and attach to it. It's a metaphor for our purification. And it's a metaphor for this kind of internal radiance.
When I first studied the Dharma and I was reading the sutras, I had a tendency to take the sutras literally, and then I realized that even current works of any good writing, fiction or fact, even songs, poetry, the best or the most eloquent writers or speakers never point to something directly, but they always use the beauty of language and metaphors to bring the reader or the listener to somewhere else through imagery, by describing certain things, or sometimes like say the whole novel Moby Dick is not about hunting whales, but a person's journey through life. So what more for a text spoken by the Buddha 2,500 years ago, and we can see through the translations that follow how rich they are. And I always thought that the Buddha would be sitting there and it would be very boring, but like kind of like what we're doing right now, just sitting here, not moving and giving no light shining, giving a very flat delivery. But the sutras, as the more I read the sutras, sometimes the Buddha breaks out in rhyme and song. Imagine that. The Buddha uses metaphors that are so rich. I'm not sure if my mind can wrap around the Buddha breaking suddenly into rhyme, but the language of the sutras are so rich, and that every time I read it, I always discover something new. Recently, a few months or maybe a year ago, I realized adornments does not literally mean adorn with jewelry, but rather it points to what he's trying to say is if someone holds the precepts well and has proper deportment, as like how the Buddha is often described. He carries himself well. When he walks, his gaze is steady. He's not being, oh, look, there's a squirrel. Oh, look. He's not looking around like that. That's what they mean in the sutras when they say adorn. So it's the physical demeanor, that the whole aura that the person projects. That's called adorn. So it doesn't mean that when they say an arhat is adorned with proper deportment, as in, it could be someone like Jin Chuan Shi said, just someone with the 3 robes, living out in the forest. What you see could be just someone who hasn't showered for a while, maybe has not eaten in 3 or 4 days, has sometimes long hair because it's not convenient in the forest to look well groomed like Jin Chuan Shi or myself. But his behavior, the way he speaks, the way he treats someone, his inherent respect for living beings, that's adornment. So the more I read the sutras, the more I see all these different layers of understanding. And that every time you read, there's always something new to discover as someone progresses. Do we have any questions at this time? Or okay, so we'll go into. You want to add something else? Anything else? Okay, so now we'll dive into the paramitas. So I gave a very quick list of the paramitas earlier. Does anyone care to remind me what was the first paramita on the first ground that the Bodhisattva practices? Giving? Yes. Dana. Dana for giving. Actually, giving was one of the things that the Buddha spoke about greatly for the lay people during the Buddha's time, because giving forms a very strong foundation for the mind to be able to do other things like holding the precepts, getting the right view, and for happiness. So does anyone would like to give a definition of what giving is from a Buddhist point of view? Or Mahayana Buddhist point of view? Okay. I'll read out what Nagarjuna said. When Nagarjuna Bodhisattva was asked, what is meant by giving? And very interestingly, and this is, although I read it many times, it's never quite affected me like today while preparing for this evening. The first response he gave was, giving refers to an instance of giving where there is a corresponding instance of wholesome intention. So just, if I read this correctly, just the thought of wanting to give, that wholesome intention, already constitutes giving. So everything comes from the mind. Everything starts from a thought. Then he said, and he just didn't leave it there in case some people really misunderstood and just go around thinking it's the thought that counts, and it's the thought that counts. It's the thought that counts. So he said, then there are those who say that the arising of physical, that means bodily actions, and verbal actions following from a wholesome intention may also qualify as giving. So you don't just think about it, but you follow through, either through speech or through a body action. Extending a hand for giving help, or to pass something from one person to another. And then he said, then there are others who say that giving refers to the coming together of three factors. And this is usually seen as the traditional form of giving. It says you need faith or understanding. You need a field of blessings, meaning, say, someone who, during the Buddha's time, this would be the monks during the Buddha's time who has cultivated and held the precepts very well. And a material object. So there's three things. You need an understanding, that means the right intention of giving. You need a field of blessings, someone worthy to receive the offerings. And then the third one is something that you actually give, a physical object. All simultaneously with the mind generating a thought of destroying selfishness. So when you give, it's with the thought of reducing my attachment. That's giving. And then, so we can come back to giving because giving is so rich. or don't think, given the time that we have, we can actually finish giving. But I thought of, unless everyone wants to go straight into giving, we had the idea of also visiting the other 6 paramitas and quickly introducing them and then coming back to giving. Is that okay? Okay.
Are people familiar with the 6 paramitas at all? They're very important in the Buddha's teachings, especially in the Mahayana tradition. It's actually one of the things that really distinguishes the Buddha, say, from the other disciples. That the Buddha actually perfected the paramitas to become a Buddha. And so what are the paramitas? Well, we just went over the first one, which was giving. The Buddha perfected giving, and the perfection of giving is more than just just giving things away. It's got a tremendous depth to it. So when we start talking about it, you'll see that the giving is actually really a practice. You can make it a practice and really deepen, go deeper and deeper into that. So that's one. The first one's precepts. The first one's giving. The second one is precepts, and that one is in Sanskrit shila, Chinese is jie, and it's a kind of a virtue. It's kind of holding to almost like a moral discipline. It's, you could say, an ethical life, and by living a really ethical life, the mind is naturally free from all regrets. It's something that it's seen actually as the natural behaviors of an awakened being. So for instance, usually they're given like the 5 precepts: not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no intoxicants. Sometimes it gets added to they call the 10 wholesome deeds. So you don't speak in a way that's harsh. You use gentle speech. You don't speak in a frivolous way. Your words are meaningful and beneficial for other people. You don't speak things that are deceitful. You don't say you don't lie to anybody. In fact, that's something that's very, very important in the Buddha's teachings, that his words are true. They're reliable. He doesn't promise something and doesn't follow through. I was just reading in we were just studying the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is the Buddha's kind of final passing when he enters parinirvana. That's the last teaching in the Theravada tradition, in the Pali Canon. And so how the sequence of events goes is that the Venerable Ananda, which is the Buddha's attendant, was near the Buddha, and then the Buddha, basically at the end of his time, he basically was there. And there's this story. What happens is Mara. I don't know people who know Mara. Do people know Mara? Mara is they say the Mara, the evil one. It's just the kind of the seen as this being who wants to keep people in confusion, because that's his territory, the world of sensual sensation, of the kind of conditioned realm. He wants to keep people trapped in this realm where the Buddha is trying to teach a way out of this conditioned realm. So but it's really interesting. Look at the sutra, because for the Mara, the Buddha is kind of like his antagonist. He's against the Buddha. He wants the Buddha to leave. But from the Buddha's perspective, just looking at the Buddha's response, he's actually very compassionate to Mara. It's almost like he's trying to teach him, trying to gather him in. Right? And so Mara says, "Oh, blessed one, you told me you're gonna leave. Hopefully you'll leave soon. Please leave." And the Buddha goes, "Okay, Mara, you make the request that I leave. And I did say that back in the beginning, when you really wanted me to leave, I said not until I establish the Dharma, so that people can explain it, understand it, and explain it to a lot of people, so they can wake up, as well as a vinaya, a discipline that they're holding purely and that they're using for awakening. Once I establish these very firmly, then I will leave. I will go." And so he says, "Yes, I remember you said that. So, okay, I agree. I agree with your request. I'll leave." And so it was very interesting to watch this exchange, because the Buddha, because I was thinking about it, how does that work? Why does the Buddha agree to Mara to leave? And I thought, oh, what? He's actually really compassionate to Mara. He's actually this being who is very confused in the Buddhist tradition, the one who's considered the evil one, keeping us trapped, is actually the Buddha treats with great compassion and actually says, okay, I will fulfill your wishes. I will fulfill your wishes. And my sense is that if you think about it, in the future, one day Mara will have a good affinity with the Buddha, and then maybe be transformed by the Buddha to wake up, which is actually, some of the Buddha's great disciples were actually a Mara in a previous existence. So there's a sense of, evil, quote unquote, in Buddhism is not this kind of pure essence evil. It's a kind of something that's just a conditioned thing that bit by bit we'll let go of this kind of dichotomy of good and bad and just wake out of our confusion, this duality. So anyways, so I'll finish the story, which is, what's the thing?
I just want to add that Mara is the one who, when the Buddha was sitting under the tree, just before he gained enlightenment, Mara sent his 3 daughters to try to seduce the Buddha. So Mara and the Buddha go way back.
Yeah, many, many lives. A long, long time. And so what happens is then Ananda comes back to the Buddha. Actually, well, the Buddha says that he relinquishes his will to live. He decides, okay, I'm going to go. And the earth shakes. We sometimes get that experience that in the sutras, when the Buddha is about to speak the Dharma or do something, sometimes the earth shakes. And so Ananda comes and asks the Buddha, what happened? Why was the earth shaking? And the Buddha tells him, well, and he goes, there's different times when the earth shakes. For instance, when the Buddha wakes up, the earth shakes. When he decides to pass away, to relinquish his will to live on, the earth also shakes. Also, Nanda, of course, goes, oh, you're no longer going to be here anymore? And of course, he starts crying and very upset. Oh, Buddha, please stay. Please stay. And the Buddha says, well, in fact, Ananda, you missed your opportunity. Because he's actually said before Mara asked him, he said, if you asked me before Mara asked me, I would have stayed on, if you kept asking. But now, I've already promised, in ways it's kind of, I've already promised Mara, I already fulfill that wish. And he says, Mara, Nanda actually asked a second and third time. He says, no, he can't, the Tathagata doesn't go back on his word. Go back on his word. So from that, there's a sense of how important you could say truth is, being true to your word. And so the Buddha was very, very, you could say, true to his word. That's one of the qualities of the Buddha. So that was just an interesting story that then that leads up to his actual passing away. So those are, you can say, different qualities of the Bodhisattva on the holding the precepts, as well as ourselves, is we can start cultivating the precepts as a way to purify our hearts and our minds. The third paramita, you want me to go over? Yeah? Okay.
So coming back to, before Chinchuan goes to the third paramita, and how this can be relevant to us. Of course, the Bodhisattva practices the paramita of precepts at a very different level at us, because it's very much at the level of the mind, whereas, say, for myself, it's still at a very coarse, sometimes at a body and speech level, which means my mind has already let it go to that extent. But in terms of inspiration, there's a lot that we can see or learn from how the Bodhisattva approaches the precepts. And we see that ability in us to expand our hearts and our minds and our perspectives, so that we could also follow or be inspired by the Bodhisattva. For example, most people's reaction to the precepts would be from the view of myself. Me, myself, I. It's going to hold me back. It's going to restrict me. I know it's good for me, but it's going to be bothersome. I can't do this. I can't do that. But if we step out of that self-view for a moment, and if we look at the people next to us, if you have children or people you care for, do I want them to grow up with someone who will never cheat on them, who will never lie to them, who will never say things that will hurt them. If I have children, okay, I don't have children, but if I had, the closest I have are my niece and nephews. Yes, nieces and nephews now. Yes, that's what I want for them. And then naturally, then the mind turns and say, hey, then what example are you then providing to your niece and nephews or to your loved ones, to your children, to your brothers, to your sisters, to your friends? So that's what the Bodhisattva does. The Bodhisattva never sees things as from the view of themselves, but they hold the precepts for all living beings, either on behalf of living beings who are unable to hold the precepts, but also the result of them holding the precepts in terms of their relationship to other people. So they know by using the content of the precepts, they're always mindful never to hurt anyone through speech, never to gossip about anyone, never to hurt anyone through body actions, or even in their minds, never give rise to harmful thoughts about them. So the Bodhisattvas, through seeing what they're capable of, is actually a mirror for us to see where we can be ourselves.
Yeah, I think I have to give the example because I don't think we're going to get too back to precepts once we go back to giving. So I just want to say the one thing that was really inspiring to me about the 10 Ground chapter was actually the Bodhisattvas. There's a passage in the sutra about the Bodhisattva when he sees other living beings breaking precepts. So the other people are breaking the precepts, and what does the Bodhisattva do? So I can just imagine, if even if we're not quote unquote take the precepts, we see some people doing harmful things, somebody's, in the department store stealing something, or somebody is, doing something in a way that we really disapprove of, quote unquote. And what's the reaction of our mind, right? So I thought, well, what does the Bodhisattva think? I don't know if people know what the Bodhisattva thinks, but to me it was quite amazing what the sutra said. It said, the Bodhisattva sees living beings breaking the precepts, and he thinks, I cannot know what are the conditions for him to break the precepts. Only the Buddhas know cause and effect at that level. The only thing I can do is hold the precepts more purely to serve as a good example, and to transfer and hold it on living beings' behalf. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting thought. I mean, that's completely not something I would ever think of in my mind. So as Jing Husher was saying about the sutra is almost like a reflection of our minds. So we look at that, wow, that's a very pure thought. He has no thought of judgment. He recognizes his own ignorance, his own inability to really understand clearly. But what he can do, what we can do, or she can do, is to purify ourselves on behalf, to help that person and to benefit all living beings. So I thought that was a very inspiring kind of little quote, because oftentimes people hold the precepts and somehow the idea is that you get kind of tight. It's like, oh, I have all these moral rules and I get very righteous and I get kind of, judgmental, but that's not all the spirits of the precepts. The precepts is this kind of opening of the heart. It's a kind of a gift to the world. It's also considered the greatest gift you can give, because you're no longer harming other people with your actions based up in body, mouth, and mind.
So as monks, we get that sometimes. People look at us and they sometimes don't have quite an idea of the precepts that monks are supposed to hold, but they see themselves as, oh, you're a monk eating ice cream? That's not a very good monk. Or a monk drinking coffee? Somehow or other that not a good monk. So perhaps we should be just drinking nettle soup and plain water all the time. Yeah, but we get a lot. Not just even when I was a layperson and I didn't quite understand what the precepts were meant for. It's human nature to see and judge people. It comes, in my case, it was habitual. I couldn't help it. I see someone who's supposed to be maintaining the precepts and they say something I know is not true. You just broke the precepts. That judging, habitual nature.
So the third paramita is that of patience, and patience is a really interesting virtue in Buddhism because it's the Buddha actually describes it not, or in the Nagarjuna Bodhisattva describes it, it's not actually just being patient with difficult times. He also says to be patient with good times too. So what does that mean? You don't let your mind just run off. The patience of Buddhism is a patience of kind of stillness, a patience of staying mindful and grounded, not getting off, going off, going off. So it's not what I really like about it is that it's not a rigid patience. Because usually we think of patience as, okay, when is this going to be over? Maybe you're listening to the lecture, oh, when is this lecture going to be over? And so we our patience at one point runs out, and then we blow up or something happens. But rather, patience in Buddhism in this sense is actually cultivating in the mind so it doesn't move. And by really doing that, the patience never runs out. So I'm giving an example. Let's say we're in a situation where you're waiting in line. Well, if you have, say, a meditation topic or your mindfulness practice, you're just mindful of your mind. You're mindful with watching your mind. You don't ever get afflicted. Your patience will never run out. But it's an active thing you have to do. You can't just let your mind run off and just kind of do and try and be patient. It's an active process of being vigorous in the mind to keep it mindful and steady, rather than letting it run off to boredom, run off to this, run off to that. And so not just in negative states. The Buddha actually says you also have to be patient with positive states. Because sometimes our mind runs off with positive things. So something goes well, and we get a promotion, we may win the lottery, you get all this exhilaration. It says actually to just follow that experience and kind of attach to it and run off with it is actually just like getting afflicted by a negative state. The reason is because the more we grab onto and get ourselves entangled with these states, at one point those states will run out. They kind of run out of steam, and then down we drop. And so the Buddha is not trying to be negative about it. He's just trying to explain how things work. And he's saying, if you want to really find a true happiness, if you want to purify your heart to the deepest extent, then observe carefully and train your mind so that you can not be moved by the external world outside. You can find an internal freedom that's beyond that. That's patience. So I always really like that, because patience to me, I never really learned patience that way. Patience was always like, mom bringing me to some kind of, function, dinner, social function or something. I'm just kind of like, I don't want to do this. And you're just kind of waiting for it to be over, and you go home and do whatever you want to do, right? But that's not real patience. So now, that's why if you can get some recitation beads, I find it very useful, just like your patience tool. You gotta sit there and you just recite. And so just wherever you are, you can always recite it in your mind. So you never have to quote unquote lose patience, because you always have your mind. You always can do something with your mind. So anyway, that's patience.
So how most people see patience is a holding in. You've already crossed that line. You're already angry, you're already upset or something, but you're just not letting it show. That's how normal people see patience. And that was how I saw patience. When I was a college student, I had a sticker on my folder that said, patience is a virtue that takes too long. And I was really proud of it because I thought it was very clever. And and ironically, from a Buddhist point of view, true patience is one where you don't even have to resort to patience, because your mind does not even move in the first place. You have so much skill, or you are so concentrated in your Dharma door that you don't even get upset. So if you don't get upset, why do you need patience? So the way Nagarjuna put it, and how Chin Chuan has been saying, non-movement of the mind. That's how he defines patience. The mind doesn't move. It's just no matter what happens, a good state, a bad state, someone horrible is doing something bad to you, or someone's really praising you and giving you things that you will really like, you don't move. You're just steady. You are master of yourself.
Okay, vigor. So I don't know if people know the fourth paramita is vigor. I just said it, vigor. Vigor. And so, what do that's not really a word we use too much. We don't go out in the street and say, let's go do this vigorously. Although, except here in the monastery, we sometimes talk like that. Let's go be vigorous. It's not something we usually use in the English, in our normal English language. But this idea of vigor is really important, because that's how we, you can say, succeed in anything. You have to apply energy, you apply effort. And so just like anything else in the Dharma, it's something we have to do. Any of these practices, we have to apply vigor, apply energy, virya. And so I always remember one story. I'll just give this story that Rev Heng Shi says about Master Hua, which was one time they were, I think, fixing up the monastery. There's this Gold Mountain Monastery. They were, I think, putting up a wall, maybe on the top floor, and so everybody was really tired, and they were doing various things. Everybody was very tired, and this truck came in and dropped all this these big plywood things and this sheet, this kind of concrete and all those things in the monastery. And so they're all looking at it like, they're all really tired. And then he said, all of a sudden, Master Hua comes running in. His sash, we do a sash, just kind of tied around. And he's like, he runs at the stuff in the middle of the room. He's just like, this is like crazy. He grabbed this huge board. It's like one person. He just run up the stairs and he'd be yelling, vigor! Jing, it's in Chinese, jing jing. He just grabbed it. He'd run up the stairs and whoosh! He comes up and he comes back down and grabs another one. And he's just running up again. Everyone's like, oh my goodness! They all run it afterwards and they do the job. And it was just like, he was just like, that was quite an image to him, remembering back then in the monastery. And it's just like that's the spirit. It's like, you're cultivating and you're going at it. And so sometimes we kind of go, I want to. It's just too much. This is too hard. My mind is just too difficult to control. It's just too crazy. I'm just gonna give up. And the sense is, no, you just keep going. Just keep applying effort, and pretty soon you'll break through. That's the idea. We just apply that kind of energy. So sometimes we'll find we'll get discouraged, but the trick really is just keep applying effort in the mind. Keep examining, looking at your mind. You'll see that all those states that we think can take over our minds, if we apply energy, they disperse. Sometimes I have to say I get the sense of a meaninglessness, or a kind of these weird states. And if I just look at them carefully and just see them as experience in themselves, and don't give them a power to them, they kind of vanish. There's a sense of really applying energy in the mind, and once you do it, it kind of breaks through something. But what I find is it takes a little bit of time, because once we start getting into a mode where we're starting to drop, you have to apply a certain amount of vigor to actually bring the mind back up. I remember when I was in college, what I actually ended up doing was, I found that kind of what worked was 3 Shurangama mantras. When I started going in kind of negative state, if I went and did 3 Shurangama mantras, it kind of opened my mind out of my confusion. So anyway, that was one way.
So why is vigor important? Because you need vigor to be able to get into proper concentration, or the dhyanas. Without vigor or a persistence that does not allow laziness to creep in, that's the foundation you need for the mind to rest and get into the dhyana. So the metaphor that's used it says that because our mind is scattered and chaotic. For example, I'm speaking to you and, hey, look, there's a squirrel. So if something were to come into the room right now, like a bat flying through, I would speak and stop and get distracted. That's the nature of the mind. So it says because of the scattered nature of the mind, it's like a lamp in which there is wind that cannot illuminate a room. So the mind is likened to a lamp, and the scatteredness is the wind. So without something to protect the mind from the elements, from distractions. You can't illuminate a room. So if you are trying to see your way out of a dark room and you're constantly exposing the flame to wind, you'll never get out. But the moment you use vigor, like a container, like your hand, to shield the flame, or a what's that thing that you put on a lamp? That glass, that flute kind of thing, and you pop immediately. So that's the analogy, the metaphor that's used for vigor. It enables your mind to remain steady and not give in to thoughts of laziness, like I've been sitting for 45 minutes and I just want to go and sleep. No, you maintain, and it's that stillness. So then, having vigor, you are able to have the mind rest enough that you enter dhyana, or proper concentration. So the dhyanas are seen as how would I say, in terms of Buddhist meditation, the first recognized stages of meditation, and how the whole paramitas work in coming to dhyana. As we've seen so far, we've only explained the importance of vigor towards dhyana, but precepts also form a very strong foundation to get into dhyana. So the Buddha described entering dhyana as someone who observes the precepts so well that through actions of the mouth, through speech, through actions of the body, you don't harm anyone. You know that you lead a life of non-harming. And not just in the physical side, but on the mental side. Your regard for people or living beings are so high that you naturally feel at ease no matter what you do or where you are. So what happens with that kind of mindset is, if you combine it with patience, as in patience with, say, the weather, patience with your environment, and your mind doesn't move, and then you layer vigor on top of that determination, and you sit. It is not, so what the Buddha is trying to say is not just through concentration. You can't just, not anyone without the foundation of the precepts or giving can just sit and say, I want to enter the dhyanas, and really, really concentrate. It's almost impossible. So it's only when you have all these layers of foundation that when you apply vigor and concentration over it, before you know it, you just slip into dhyana. So it's someone who's really peaceful, who is, what's the word I'm looking for? Has a very strong sense of well-being in themselves. And just sit down almost with an imperceptible smile on his face, or that's how I like to imagine someone like that. And just deep breath, sit, relax, and they go into the dhyanas. Yeah. Do you want to do it?
Yeah, so just the last comment for dhyana. Dhyana is the Sanskrit word, but as it comes to us here in the West, I think most people know the word Zen. The word Zen. Actually, that's the kind of the linkage goes from dhyana to China, which got translated to be chana. And the Chinese like to shorten words, so it became chan. And then when they got to Japan, the way they pronounce the word chan is Zen. So then it comes to America, it's Zen. And so it's just a sense of, it's a little bit different in the Chan or the Zen school, but it's in terms of the dhyana being this just a focus, a kind of a meditative focus. For them, it's always having the mind focused and single-minded all the time, and never leaving that. And never leaving kind of the unmoving mind, and staying with that and taking that in every single thing. That's kind of Zen. It's not, they're not talking about there's not those for them. There's no entering and leaving kind of a state of concentration. So that's the Zen practice. But there's a linkage there between dhyana to Zen. I just want to point that out. Okay, yeah.
So very good description, again by Nagarjuna Bodhisattva. He defines dhyana as being neither mentally distracted nor indulging of enjoyment. So it's very much like patience. When you go in and you are in that mode, the mind doesn't move regardless of what happens, what states you come across, or how you feel, or what your body is telling you, or what the environment is telling you.
Yeah. Actually, another thing to add to that, when he said enjoyment, it's particularly sensual enjoyment. It's not based on the senses. The Buddha actually, on his kind of in the process of awakening, I think when people know that he cultivated really ascetic practices, right? He went and cultivated ascetic practices, and then he got to a certain stage and realized this is not gonna work. This is not leading to the kind of complete liberation. And so what he remembered, he's actually in the suttas, it says he remembered a time when he was a kid, and he actually went into the first dhyana, and he said, "Am I afraid to enter this state that's not based on the sense? The joy of that is not based on the senses." He says, "No, I'm not afraid of that, and I can enter in that." And so he goes into that, and he goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and says that the dhyanas are basically it's extremely joyful, extremely happy, but it's an extremely joyful, happy process by letting go. So each stage of the dhyanas is really interesting. This is the stage where he transcends happiness, and it's really blissful. And he goes, it just describes in this interesting detail, and it's this process of purification. And so what I think in that line that Jing Husher just read, which seems very simple, right? The mind not getting distracted and not indulging in enjoyments is actually very profound, in the sense that if we didn't do that, fundamentally we would be extremely happy. We would be completely content. But it's not a happiness born from external conditions. So it's something that's very, very stable that we can ground ourselves on. That's kind of the background where that comment can come out, and if you don't know the background, you can see like, wow, that seems very boring. That's not being distracted and not having any enjoyment. Gosh, that doesn't seem like a very happy life. Most of the time, I'm just distracting my mind with my, computer screen or doing something. It's actually saying, in fact, you're completely happy, joyful, complete underneath. It's just don't get distracted. Don't go out running for external pleasures and happiness, thinking that that'll ultimately satisfy. And if you cannot do that, come back. You will find something much, much deeper. So it's like we have all these hidden treasures within. We just have to uncover it. So the last one we're talking about tonight is actually to this particular ground, which is the sixth ground. Right? We're talking about the sixth ground, Bodhisattva. And this is the ground called, this is the paramita called prajna, which we talked about in the beginning, which is the paramita that describes wisdom, or the teachings on emptiness. And so in this particular chapter, people who have been here have hopefully at this point know the 12 conditioned links by memory. We've gone over them probably, I guess, at least like 10 or 15 times now, because every week it's the same topic, and we've been looking at it from this angle. We had a PowerPoint slide, the nuns came and even showed all the kids in the girls' school drawing pictures, applying the 12 conditioned links to movies and their lives and various topics in society. And so we've gone over them so much, but I think that's one way to look at our experience, to basically see that there's ultimately no self. It's a kind of conditioned reality that's all just constantly in flux, constantly in movement, but there's something going on that's just there. And if we can see that process, we can actually let go of a lot of the attachments that we usually have, be it our cravings, our clingings, our ignorance. And by that analysis is basically a tool for us to understand our experience so that we won't cling, we won't attach. So that's the teachings of Prajna, which is in the West sometimes very confusing because we read all these. Oftentimes, what I find a better translation, the word no, like no suffering, no self, is actually use the word freedom from. We're free from suffering. We're free from self. Self being this kind of constant sense of self that I'm this thing that I have to protect, and you're free of it. And by that freedom, there's an openness. And that's what's emptiness in Buddhism. So it's actually really quite positive. It's I mean, positive is then starting to put another layer on it. So it's not quite positive either, but it's not nihilism at all. So the emptiness of Buddhism actually is not nihilism, which the Buddha actually says, I'm not teaching nihilism. So the emptiness teachings are there to teach us to let go. And that's what the Prajna Paramitas, the Bodhisattva at this stage, has let go to a very, very deep extent, where they're not attached to the things that we ordinary beings are attached to. They don't have a sense of self. They're able to see through a lot of things. But at the same time, they still keep this heart to rescue living beings. So although they have seen through a lot of the things of society, because they want to help living beings, they still engage in those activities with a complete unattached mind to help other people or other beings, all beings. Because Buddhism is not just about humans, it's about animals, insects, all the beings of the Dharma realm. Okay, it's like we actually didn't get back to giving, so we actually went over all the paramitas. Maybe any last questions about the paramitas? They're actually a really important list. So if you want to memorize something, the 6 paramitas is a really good list to memorize, and I would actually encourage, if you like, is to take on one of the paramitas as your kind of life mission. I believe that's a really good mission. If you want to have a mission in life, is I'm going to really perfect patience. I'm going to really do that really well. So what does that mean? You just go study it and really work on it. And I think that will be much better than if you make your mission like, I'm going to make $1 million. I promise you'll be a lot happier if you make the patience your mission in life, or any of the 6. And what's also great about it is you'll probably not perfect it in this life, so you can have something to constantly work on and improve in for your whole life. And it'll definitely carry you to a very good place. So the 6 paramitas is very, very important. So, any questions online? If there's not, people can think about it, but I can just make a couple announcements. Basically, in the beginning of the lecture, we said that Rev. Heng Shi will be back next week. So everybody, you'll be able to see Rev. Heng Shi and for sure come back, because actually the following week he has to go to Gethsemane. There's a Catholic Buddhist gathering. And Gethsemane is the monastery of Thomas Merton, who is a pretty well-known Catholic monk. Actually, I read his works, and that's actually what inspired me to become a monk in many ways. I read his writings. But he'll be going there for an interfaith conference. So he'll be gone for another week, then he'll come back again. But if you want to catch him, you're going to have to come next week, otherwise there'll be another 3 weeks. So next week will be a good time to come. Otherwise, we're finishing this semester, so all the university classes that have been going on Monday night, Wednesday night, Friday night are coming to a close. Our Thursday Introduction to Buddhism class is also taking a stop because of the summertime. And so just let people know, but we'll start again upcoming semester in fall, probably sometime in September. Otherwise, our regular Saturday night lecture is going to be continuing over the summer. The Thursday East Bay meditation group is still meeting. And of course our daily meditation schedule is going on all the time, and our Saturday Dharma assembly in the morning and the afternoon is going strong. So I don't know if I'm missing any announcements. Maybe Buddha-Roo Farm. We have a retreat coming up very soon, June 7th to the 13th. I believe registration is over, but if you want to sign up online, it's oregon.berkeleymonastery.org, and be put on a waiting list. If we can find transportation for you, you might still be able to go. if you would like to provide transportation, I heard that you'll be higher up on priority on the waiting list. So we can accommodate more people. So, but that's a really good retreat. So if people want to have a little bit of a time to go out into nature and cultivate the mind with good Dharma friends, you can apply some vigor in your practice. That's a really good opportunity. Okay, yes. Oh. Yeah. A good way? A method? Oh, a method? Okay, I don't know if there's a method. I thought it was a good. Maybe one way you can try to memorize it is, I think if you group things, it becomes easier to memorize. At least for me, if you group the links together. So, I don't know if people remember. What's the first one? Ignorance. Yes, ignorance. Okay, so you should remember ignorance. That's the start. Okay, so ignorance or delusion. So not seeing things clearly. That leads to the second one, which is activities. Yeah, somebody say activities. I heard a whisper, which is basically doing things that are kind of confused based on ignorance, right? So then the third one is consciousness. Oh, you got a memory. So third one is consciousness. Consciousness. Okay, I won't go and define them because that'll take time. So consciousness leads to next what? Name and form. Oh, people, pretty good. Name and form, which then leads to six sense organs. Six sense organs is basically eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Right? So we have basically the six sense organs, which then goes to, what does the six organs do? Contact. Contact. Okay, so if you group them, I would say you can take all that place before contact as one set. So from ignorance to six sense organs, that's things that are happened in the past. Okay, we've done the things in the past. So you can think ignorance, activities, consciousness, name and form, and six sense organs. So 5 things, right? We have 5 things. So you can remember the first 5. Okay, so 5 things. These things I've done in the past. My current experience starts from contact, right? You're coming into contact with your ear is hearing my voice, and then you have an awareness which discriminates it, and then there's a contact. You contact it. Okay, so now your experience is starting, right? The present experience is starting. Contact, which leads to what? Next one. Contact leads to feeling. So feeling. So that's actually really interesting. Buddhism sees feeling as just being 3 things: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So our current experience is, if you really analyze it, we have 3 reactions to it: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And that's based on our habitual patterns from the past, right? How we react to something, our preferences. So then the feeling leads to craving, a desire, right? We like the things that we like. We desire, we want the things that we like. And that leads to grasping, we hold on, which leads to becoming, kind of identifying, holding on to it. And so that's depending. Sometimes they say becoming is part of the present moment. It actually says half. Some becoming is in this current present moment, current life, and some becoming is the future existence in a future time. And so basically that's the next set I would try to remember. So the first set is 5. So you remember, I need to remember 5 things. The second set goes from contact to feeling, craving, clinging or grasping, and then becoming. It's another 5. Right? So 5, and if it's 12, there's 2 more left. You remember what the last 2 are? What happens after grasping and becoming? Birth. So you get born. Something comes into existence again. You get born, which then leads to old age, sickness, and despair. You've got the list. So you can always remember that list. I always find that list very, I don't know if it's not funny, but it's because I listen to the Theravada monks give a lot of Dharma talks, and they always list it off, I just always find it very striking because they kind of list it off with a smile. Old age, sickness, death, old age, lamentation, sickness, death, and despair. And it's like, whoa. But it's said in a kind of like this is just how it is. This is just how it is. And so basically, if we get born, what happens is we end up dying. So that's the last two. And that's considered in the future. So basically, if you remember 552, or if you want to think about it as 543, sometimes that becoming is sometimes classified in the future section. So that's one way to, I think, that helps memorize it. Because if you group them, then you go, okay, so what are the 5 things again? You go, what are the 4 or 5 things again? And then, okay, last 2, okay. So then at least you can memorize 3 structures rather than have to take 12 things and try to memorize that.
So I just want to add that when the Buddha spoke about the 12 conditioned links, he was describing how our thoughts come up and come and go, and also human existence. So we begin with understanding, or say we memorize the list, but that's not what. That's not the point. The point is once you have an intellectual understanding, and you see how one ignorance is the karmic conditions for activities. So what happens then is you try to identify with it in your own process, and you see as much as how much can you identify in how you encounter something, or in your thoughts arising and falling. Then once you understand that, then you don't even need to memorize it. Then you just see it and you put it into practice to understand your mind better.
There's nothing else. We have our transference of merit. It's on the same Dharma request sheet, which is that we started the lecture with on the back. Flip it over. You flip the sheet over and you'll see it says dedication of merit. So I don't know if Adam, it's on the Dharma request sheet. You see it? Okay, you have. Okay. So yeah. So basically, what we do at the end of lecture is we dedicate the merit from the being together, studying the Dharma. We didn't do a lot of bad things from sitting here. That's really good from the Buddhist perspective.
And Alan gets to practice his guitar skills.
Alan gets to practice guitar skills. And so from that goodness, we can give it out. We talk about the perfection of giving. This is one way of giving, is to think of something that we would like to give it to. Maybe our parents are feeling sick, or our loved ones are not doing well. I know there's the huge earthquake that happened in Nepal that I'm sure people are still suffering from. There's a lot of things in the world that could use some extra goodness and support, and so we can send it out there, or you can send it out just widely to all beings. But the important thing is to send it out with a sincere heart. So, okay. Our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and heart can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. So we can stand up and bow to the Buddhas. Bow in respect to the Venerable Master.